And so I was soaking wet under this bridge in Lyon like a troll, and I just like contemplating myself and how I created this particular. And no one was giving me a ride in Lyon because they're all very snobbish there. I recommend not ever going there. And so I went to the next town and had trouble getting a ride there, but eventually I caught one and made it to this truck stop in Valence. And I was getting really frustrated because I'd spent so much time that day trying to find a ride just to get out of there, and I'd made it almost nowhere. And I was like, man, I've really blown it. I'm not going to see the Unité because I'm going to arrive so late. And what's interesting is when you're hitchhiking and you're not having much success, you really start to lose your dignity really fast, and that's okay. You're just okay with it. So what I would do is, if I didn't have a ride for a certain amount of time, I'd just have the sign and I'd start dancing for approaching cars. And it was actually remarkable how well that worked. So eventually I caught this ride with this guy who pulls up in like this turtle van of ridiculous gadgetry everywhere, just strewn about. And my sign was for Montélimar, which was fairly nearby, and he's like, well, I'm going to Marseille. And of course, I was very excited to hear that because he was going to take me the rest of the way. So this is me at like 1 in the morning with his friends drinking beer in park in Saint-Tropez. And what was really incredible was like 6 hours before I was stuck under a bridge in Lyon, miserable, and 6 hours later I couldn't have been more elated. And here he is dropping me off in Marseille. Okay, so I get to Marseille, and he dropped me off in the middle of the afternoon, so I knew I was going to go see the building that day. And at this point, I'd been so free spirit about my trip that I was starting to find essentially the opposite of the stress from not having accommodation. Just the act of planning out accommodation was stressing me out, so I just stopped dealing with it. Right? I was just so comfortable with the idea of never having a plan. So I was like, okay, well, I'll sleep on the beach in Marseille. And this guy I just happened to meet bought me a beer, and after calling me his guardian angel, I departed and was going to go to the Unité. And the sun was going down, it was like 9:30, and it was starting to get a bit dark. And I started seeing all these rats scurrying around everywhere, because Marseille is filthy, and it's very un-French, actually. And I was like, oh man, I've really blown this, because rats are my #1 thing. Like, I can't handle it. And so I'm getting on the subway, like, you know, in the exact middle, so I can watch the tracks and avoid the rats, and like avoid the rats on this side. And I get on the train and I start going to find the Unité. So I'm like, whatever, I'll worry about this later, I'm gonna go find the Unité. And of course I had a lousy Google map that took me to the wrong place. Just the middle of nowhere. So I'm walking around this massive city, asking strangers if I can use their iPhones to bring up a map of where it really is, which proved unsuccessful. But eventually, 4 hours into my trip, I found it at 1:30 in the morning. And so here I am. But the hotel was closed, and so I started doing this half investigation of the building and half like looking for a place to sleep on it. And so there I am, at 2 in the morning, sleeping on the steps of the Unité. And I think I've got the elevation next. Okay, go one more. That's where I slept. And what was hilarious is like at 6 in the morning, these like old ladies and like working types were coming up the door at the top of the staircase, and I was like, pardon. Okay, so I only had like 1 day there and like 5 hours. So I decided, because I found the roof, upon getting there, I didn't even know it existed. But as soon as I got out there, I was absolutely blown away by how incredible it is. It's like, the only way I can really describe it is it's like someone found Corbusier's sketchbook of unfinished ideas and then just decided to build them and collage them all together. And it was so exciting for me because I'd never seen it, I had never seen it analyzed or talked about, so it was like this untouched palette that I could scurry about and figure out. So here's a real cool shot of how the edge of the roof and how he just cut off everything in the surrounding except that like slight tick of ocean. Yeah. And so here's a shot of like the pool. And this is a really cool edge as well. So the gap between that edge and like the real back edge was like 15 feet. But from this perspective, it looked like you could walk up that ramp and just fall off the building. And this ramp was super interesting to me as well, if you go to the next slide. Because this was done about 25 years after Villa Savoye, and at this point, Corb had essentially discarded his 5 points, and by rejecting them in his own work, he essentially rendered them irrelevant. And so, this was really interesting to me because this ramp was an exact inversion of the Villa Savoye ramp, and then on the turn, he drops in this staircase gap, almost like this conceptual projection of his 5 points or like previous use of the ramp, which I found incredible. The students I was talking to about it did not find it very incredible. And this is like, I don't know what this is. Here's some more shots of this. And this is like this really interesting, I showed you the stairwell where I slept, but on the adjacent one, near the lobby, there's this really bizarre, like pseudo-brutalist piping system, and it's clearly being celebrated by the transparent windows. I'd never seen this before. Super incredible. But I don't know why anyone would go up the stairs like I did, so I can understand why there's no photos. That's a pretty cool. Okay. So to conclude, on the left, this is an article by Colin Rowe about La Tourette, which is it's a great, really great article. But he says at a certain point that the building tends to revolve, to pivot around an imaginary central spike, and at the same time, the building also tends to a supremely static behavior. And I totally disagree with this thought. And I find it really interesting that we read these articles and accept them as fact and don't question them. But I think that's a dangerous thing because I completely disagree with his comment about the mass revolving. I didn't feel that in any way. And what I'm getting at is with shots like this of this window. This is in the Villa Savoye, and that's the only window that turns like that. And maybe that's irrelevant, and you know what, it probably is. But what I want to encourage you to or how I want to potentially inspire you with this lecture is that the only way I know that it's not like that and that it doesn't revolve, and the only way I know this window exists is because I went there. I read it in a book and then I went there. And for me and a few of my peers, we visited with Peter Eisen last October, and I think it might have been Jordo or someone said, "What's your advice for young architects? Like, what is the best advice you can give?" And he said, "Go see architecture." And that's kind of a silly thing, or a silly dumb thing to say, but it's also incredibly astute because, well, it is. And so you can see, I guess what I'm trying to say with this last image is you can study stuff in books all you want, but your education and knowledge is nothing more than a house of cards. Thank you. How are the bears doing? Meg, how are the bears doing? I am permanently in darkness, do you know that? I would